As I've talked about a few times, no matter the model of competition that you're in, whether it be a perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, or monopoly, no matter what, the cost curves aren't going to change. Cost curves are always only relevant to themselves. The model of competition is really more relevant to demand and the revenue that a firm's going to experience. Remember, when we talked about the difference between perfect competition and a monopoly, the key there was what they can do with their price. And that's the price they sell their product for. So obviously we're talking about revenue and consumption. Their cost, that's an entirely different matter. So when we look at our four models of competition, it's important to understand that the demand curve each firm faces is likely to be different based on the amount of competition they face. When we look at the things that determine elasticity of demand, or PED, remember, of these five, well, let's go through them. Time to respond, that's about the consumer. How long does it take the consumer to respond to a higher or lower price? Addictive, again, that's about the consumer. Luxury or necessity, that's in the consumer's eyes. Proportion of income, it's the consumer's income that we're talking about, so again, it's the consumer. But this one's substitution, some of that idea at least is about how many other firms or suppliers are out there. So this one's substitution is really, of the five determinants, it's the only one that has to do with the firm itself, or the amount of firms in the market. So when we look at this, well, just in our definitions from perfect competition to monopoly, and remember monopolistic competition and oligopoly are also in between those two. When we talk about having more and more and more firms in the industry, or fewer and fewer and fewer firms down to just one, well, obviously that's going to have an effect on substitution. Therefore, from that logic, we can determine that for the most part, in most cases, but not always, for the most part, monopolies are going to face a much more inelastic demand curve because there are no substitutes for their product. It's not a guarantee that the demand curve is going to be inelastic. If I have a monopoly on refrigerator sales in the Antarctic, well, not too many people are going to want those, so that's going to be a different, there's going to be a different result there. But assuming my product is something that people have, a high degree of utility for, if I'm the only supplier of it, it's going to make that demand curve much more inelastic. But if there are almost infinite amount of suppliers of a homogeneous product, a product that is the same no matter who provides it, well then, as far as substitution goes, there are many and very good substitutes. There's many substitutes, and they're all very good, very suitable substitutes. So that's necessarily going to make perfectly competitive firms tend to face a more elastic demand curve, but not necessarily. If there were perfectly competitive firms supplying a very addictive product, it tends to be an oligopoly, one or two gangs or organizations or something like that supplying it. But if it was perfectly competitive, that would still tend to be a more steep demand curve because of the nature of the addiction. But as it happens, for the most part, most of your examples are going to follow this pattern. So the next step then is to see what happens when marginal costs change for a firm based on the type of demand curve they face. Note that in these examples, since I'm not talking about profit, I don't really need average cost, so I've left it out just to simplify. All we're talking about is the quantity produced and the price at which it will be sold. For that, I just need marginal cost, marginal revenue, and then the average revenue curve. So in this case, the perfect competition that faces a perfectly elastic demand curve, well, any change to marginal cost is going to have zero effect on price, because remember, the firms are price takers. So all of the change is only going to be in Q. So for this firm, when their marginal costs go up, labor costs, some cost of some other input rises. When that happens, all that can occur is that they will supply less when they are profit maximizing. There's no change to price. A firm that faces a downward sloping but still relatively elastic demand curve, something in monopolistic competition, with the same effect, so if marginal costs increase, what we're going to see is that Q is going to change a lot more than P. Now keep in mind here, We figure out Q by saying we profit maximize, so we're MC and MR where they intersect. But price is determined by the demand curve, so we have to go up to the demand curve and over to establish the price. Likewise here, with a firm that faces a more inelastic demand curve, probably a monopoly, but it doesn't have to be. Here, if marginal costs were to go up, then again what we're going to see is that Q is going to decrease by only a little bit, and more of the change is going to be seen on the y-axis with price. The next 3 videos that will follow will be a further investigation of monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. If you have any questions or comments, put them below.